It feels kind of a new normal now. We are all getting used to a new routine, working from home and working for the home, of course. While we are all getting used to the lockdown, another financial year just closed and a new one started on April 1st. This time, a pandemic has forced all businesses, without exception, to reforecast all plans, budgets, and estimates for the current financial year and potentially for longer. A key cost of all businesses is employee and HR costs, covering, to name a few, salaries, benefits, payments to non employee staff such as consultants, contract workers, etc. Often, employers are compelled or considering cutting these costs, as it's usually a cost that can be reduced easily and ensures direct impact to the bottom line.
Hi, Samita. Hello, everybody. I'm Amrut Joshi, and I'm joining Samita today as the team from Game Changer Law Advisors continues our series on various employment law issues that have arisen as a result of COVID 19. As Samita mentioned, personnel costs weigh very heavily on businesses. The impact of a worker or an employee losing his job today is actually very unparalleled. It can't be compared to past economic downturns or situations where the world has witnessed significant job losses. Today, an employee needs his salary to survive the lockdown, care for the family, tied through sickness, often without any medical insurance or other sickness benefits as well. Recognizing the perils of job loss on the community and collective efforts to battle the pandemic, the central and state governments have been issuing a number of advisories urging companies to retain their workforce, especially those who are most vulnerable at the bottom of the pyramid, and to not resort to any kind of layoffs or reduction in pay.
Yes, that's all very well, you might say, if you are a business owner, especially a small or medium scale one. But how do I keep myself above water while also being humane? In today's podcast, Amrut and I will outline a few key suggestions and proposals that can be considered by the government to ease the burden of personnel related costs on employers.
Right, let's get started then. To kick off, I thought we can discuss one option that the central government has introduced through the Employee Provident Fund organization, where any member of the scheme can avail a non refundable advance of up to 3 months of their basic wages and dearness allowance, or 75% of the amount in their EPF account. This certainly does seem to provide a viable and accessible option to most of the salaried class in India. What do you think, Samita?
Yes, I definitely think this is a great initiative and, of course, very timely. The Provident Fund, as everybody knows, is a social security contribution intended as a retirement benefit. However, it already allows for partial withdrawal in case of monetary exigencies such as medical illness, purchase of property and construction, or higher education. It's also been reported in less than the 10 days after this was announced, approximately 125 crores has been dispersed by the EPFO. This is a great move by the government to ensure cash is in the hands of those who need it the most and independent of the status of their jobs. This is similar to the economic impact payments that the US just announced last week, in that it is utilizing the framework of social security accounts to get money to its citizens. But that's where it differs in that the US is making direct cash transfers and it's not a payment out of accrued contributions.
So it sounds like there's some cushion for employees who avail this facility. However, this does not by itself reduce the employer's burden of making regular payments of salaries, right?
Yes, exactly, you're right. As you pointed out, this is just a payment from the government, government contributions. But this is where we think there could be some relaxation shown to employers. The government could allow employers to defer or reduce the wages of those employees who have already availed this benefit from the EPFO. This ensures that the scarce cash resources of the employer are redistributed in a manner where it is paid to those who really need them and those who have no other source of income or cash to tide through these times. This would mean entering into some sort of an agreement with the labor union or individual employees where workers agree to receive a reduced wage now but continue to receive other benefits such as medical insurance, continued PF contributions, etc. I think another option that I can think of is to consider if the frequency for payment of wages can be altered. For instance, move to a quarterly payment cycle instead of a monthly payment. This would allow businesses to preserve their liquidity in the short term and then meet all employee obligations in a future date when hopefully the liquidity situation and economic crisis has slightly improved.
I think just on that particular note, perhaps the government's hands are tied by the amount of reserves that exist in the government's, bank accounts at this particular point in time. However, I think what also needs to be understood is that from a business standpoint, what we are grappling with is allocation of scarce resources. And in such a scenario, businesses have to take a more nuanced approach. Just to add to what you've suggested, from an employer's standpoint, where it is possible to do so in the formal economy, employers can also consider non-stock models of compensation to their employees and consultants wherever possible and feasible. This could take the form of ESOPs or stock appreciation rights or other such models. This certainly can apply to managerial employees, executives, and those who are decision makers. This would help preserve liquidity, can allow senior staff to take a higher proportion of the wage cut, and can help businesses to bounce back to recovery once the pandemic, recedes.
That's right. Staying on the theme of liquidity preservation for employers. Of course, that is key, and that's what I want to bring up next. Several countries, including Australia, Denmark, New Zealand, Ireland, and Canada, to name a few, have offered wage subsidies to employers. Of course, it's subject to conditions on eligibility, but the common theme is that if a business is so distressed and it has demonstrated financial and operational data to back this up, and the distress is a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak, then they are eligible to receive a wage subsidy. Such subsidies can take different forms. In one case, it has been structured as a subsidy of up to 75% of an employee's wages, as in the case of Canada, or in another case, as in Australia and New Zealand, it's structured as a fixed amount paid to the employer per eligible employee. Japan and Holland have also formulated a different kind of wage subsidy but structured it as a reimbursement to eligible employers available for a fixed duration. As you know, the nature of the pandemic is hopefully temporary, these measures are also temporary and intended to help businesses tide through the turbulence and have been announced to last for between 3 months or a bit longer in certain countries.
So, in a sense, what these countries are offering is direct government support to needy businesses to stem the increase or to delay any kind of employee restructuring exercises. Of course, these will require significant financial overlays. Perhaps this is something that individual states in India should consider implementing, depending on the need of businesses in their local areas. After all, social security, social insurance, unemployment are items that are on the concurrent list of our constitution, which will thereby allow individual states to implement separate measures as are appropriate in that particular state's context. For instance, it could be rolled out for specific industries or those sectors which have a heavy reliance on contract labor or migrant workers. Is that something that can be looked at by governments?
Yeah, I definitely think that's a great idea. As you had pointed out earlier, what's required right now is a nuanced approach. And in order for the government measures to be effective, there is a need to recognize this upfront. And what this essentially means is decentralization of decision making. So these temporary measures can be introduced for economic recovery by each state and local governing bodies based on their assessment of the needs of their own labor force. Additionally, they can also implement other labor and employment measures in conjunction with other incentives and programs that they are introducing. In fact, I'd like to point out another model of subsidy that the governments can consider is work share arrangements that are currently in force in Canada. This is structured as an adjustment program designed to help employers and employee to avoid layoffs when there is a temporary reduction in the normal level of business activity that is beyond the control of the employer. These measures are intended to provide income support to eligible employees and also allow for pooling of resources amongst employees working in similar or interconnected roles so that job security is offered to the maximum number of persons.
Okay. So, yeah, I think from what I'm hearing from you, it certainly seems to make a lot of sense here. Decentralization would offer a greater flexibility to tailor measures and increase the impact and effectiveness for individual businesses. Um, you- an important employee benefit that is offered across India is that of vacation and sick leave. There are state-wise legislations on this topic offering different number of leaves to deal with sicknesses. In fact, Karnataka has amended their legislation to increase the sick leave days for those who have tested positive for COVID-19 to 28 days. Uh, what would you say on such measures that have been taken by the government here with regard to sick leave, Samita?
That's right. So, paid sick leave is obviously a very important employee benefit to employees in normal circumstances, and it's assumed even greater significance in today's situations. People need to have job security and an income to effectively deal with this pandemic. While Karnataka has led the way by increasing the number of days of paid sick leave, one thing to remember is that the burden of this sick leave is on the employer, who is, as we have just been discussing, under significant financial stress. Hence, an alternative option, and this has been adopted in a few other countries such as Ireland, is to extend sick leave as a universal benefit to all individuals, whether employed or working as a contractor or consultant. What this means is even gig workers will get covered. This sick leave is administered by the government directly or through government provided medical insurance. To draw inspiration from this, perhaps this can be offered in India in some form through a government fund created for this purpose, or so that even gig and platform workers can benefit from paid sick leave. After all, the gig workers are a significant proportion of the labor force today and largely unrepresented and often work without any benefits in the form of insurance or paid leaves.
That's true, but all of this also calls for a certain amount of regulatory imagination from different authorities within the government, both in the states as well as at the central level. Particularly with regard to the treatment of the gig economy in India. As many reports have highlighted, the Indian gig economy is estimated to be second only to the US in terms of size. Accordingly, I do believe that a certain amount of creativity and imagination from regulators, both at the central government level and the state government level, will be merited as this entire sector is definitely going to need a lot of attention in the days ahead. With this, I'd actually like to wrap up this podcast. Any other concluding remarks that you would like to share with our listeners, Samita?
Yes, I think just to summarize, we have tried to set out a few proposals that we think are workable in the current situation. Of course, these ought to be assessed from a financial viability perspective by the government that's going to implement it. But numbers and math are never things that I understand very well even today, and that's probably why I still remain a lawyer. But one last thing I want to add, another sore point for employers, and which will be a cash drain in the future months, will be the requirements of the Payment of Bonus Act, which requires payment of a mandatory bonus even in the case of a loss-making entity. The government probably needs to consider waiving this requirement for this financial year and, if needed, for the next one as well, or at least exempt certain establishments such as small and medium enterprises from the requirement of this mandatory bonus.
Certainly, a very interesting food for thought. Lots of points in here for regulators and governments to consider. Let's hope someone important has been listening to this podcast.
Great. Thanks, Amrut, for joining me today. And thank you to our listeners. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay tuned into our next podcast. Thank you.